right, well, with the ANC celebrating its centenary this weekend, several dignitaries are in South Africa, including heads of states from across the continent and indeed across the world, as well as friends of the ANC who helped the party during apartheid. Now, among these people is Rev Jesse Jackson, the U.S. human rights activist who fought fiercely against his and other Western governments' support of the apartheid government in South Africa. Now, his most memorable speech was in 1984 to the United Nations Committee Against Apartheid, where he urged freedom fighters in South Africa and elsewhere on the continent not to adjust to apartheid, but to fight it. I am privileged to welcome Rev Jesse Jackson into studio. Welcome.
I'm glad to be here tonight.
Now, if you would mind, Africa's oldest liberation movement is indeed celebrating its centenary. Can you give us some of your most poignant memories, anecdotes, if you will?
I think the context is 300 years of racist, colonial, apartheid occupation by the Portuguese and the Dutch and the Boers, and 100 years of ANC to overcome that, and you won the victory. You've had a democracy now for 18 years, and that involves checks and balances and transparency and figuring out how to make it work. But you've had smooth election transitions without coup, without violent overthrow. You're building a multiracial, multicultural society, and that requires some urgency, but also a kind of patience as well. One thing stands out in my mind. One, I came in 1979, and I was challenged at the airport by the press. Why are you here? I got in by chance with the help of Frank Chicani and the South African Council of Churches and the U.S. Council of Churches. And why are you here? I'm here to visit friends. Why are you here? So I'm here because I want to see the system. I know that South Africa and South Carolina, where I came from, was very much the same. And so they said, what's your opinion of South Africa? I said, well, human rights for all human beings, measure human rights by one yardstick. That's it. I mean, that was offensive. Human rights for all human beings, measured by one yardstick. And big headlines next day, Jackson should not be allowed in the country. In that 1979 day, there were no black pilots or flight attendants, no blacks working, exchanging tickets at the ticket counter. So new South Africa today. Another, going down into the crossroads, I think about the education studies coming out today. And I saw this government trying to impose, or that government, impose Afrikaner as a language on black South Africans, and that was this great resistance. I saw kids, it had been raining, sitting on little benches and little tubs with their feet in the mud, learning how to write on a cardboard on a tree, refusing to give in, and they would do the toya. I mean, this will to learn against the odds was fascinating to me. And so when I see these scores coming out, the South African kids are doing better, they just had a chance to do better 18 years, and they're going to get even better still.
Absolutely. Now, we know apartheid has been, over officially since 1994. From what you have seen, and I'm sure you've kept an eye on developments in the country, do you think there has been sufficient progress made?
I think maybe we should stop putting it that way. Race apartheid is over, but the economic apartheid, the wealth poverty gap apartheid is not over. The health, blacks, infant mortality rate is greater, the life expectancy is shorter. The banking apartheid is not over. Who is allowed to get money is not over. The trading and shipping apartheid is not over. The mining, so we moved the race, the color, the mention of apartheid, but the economic, healthcare, industrial apartheid is still real. Therefore, those who once fought for freedom must now fight for equality. And many of our freedom allies may not be our equality allies, but that's the next great phase of the struggle. I'm impressed with what has happened here. In fact, you've had Mr. Mandela elected, I was here, and then succeeded by Thabo, and then by Zuma. You've had elections in some orderly fashion, and if you disagree with someone, you have the right to vote or run yourself. I mean, democracy does not guarantee speed, it should guarantee thoroughness and opportunity, however.
Now, Rev Jackson, of course, as we've mentioned, South Africa's made great strides. Now, let's go further into the continent. Many outside observers will critique elections, corruption in government. What is your perspective of how far the rest of the continent, that did many countries gain democracy even before South Africa, and their performance?
Well, from Nkrumah in 1957 down to Mandela in 1994, you see the growth of democracies across the continent. South Africa, most economies now are growing economies in Africa. U.S., for example, has a trade deficit with Asian countries, a trade surplus to African countries, because this is the most resourceful continent on earth, and it's coming into its own. That is very impressive to me. I think the other thing is that we must, where we find corruption, lack of transparency, let's fight it. But that cannot just be for Africa. In America, the U.S. and Britain went into Iraq. The wrong target. We lost lives, money, honor, spent over $2 trillion and gave no-bid contracts to corrupt contractors. That was a very corrupt and wrong war. And so those with their cast judgment must look at a mirror, not just through a window pane, as it were. So we must fight corruption wherever we find corruption. But I say that what democracy does is gives you the right to fight for the right. And you look back at 18 years, you should have reason to face the unfinished business, fighting poverty, illiteracy, and disease. But South Africans ought to feel better about themselves than they did 18 years ago. And you're growing, and that's good news.
But indeed, let's take it again back to the continent. Of course, last year, we saw a wave of protest across the Arab world, much of which touched on North Africa. We've seen regime change, the fall of so-called dictators. Is this a kind of action that you would like to will going forward for other countries?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, you have Occupy as a spirit. It's an idea. And wherever there is a gap of corruption, it steps in the gap. Jesus going to the temple, they corrupted the temple with money changers and corrupted priests. He kicked over the money tables and the changers. He occupied that space, seeking to close the gap. You see the Occupy is a Gandhi getting Britain out of India. You see Martin King getting apartheid out of the south of the United States of America. And so now you see this quest now, whether it's Occupy New York, Occupy Egypt, there's a struggle around the world to even the playing field. Too few have too much concentrated wealth, there's too much poverty, too many unnecessary wars, and too many poor people. We can do better. We have the capacity now to wipe out, to afford every person drinkable water. To afford every person a place to live, for all of our children education and a meal to eat. We must realize those ideals in our time. We have the resources to do it if we have the will to do it.
Absolutely. And on that note, Reverend Jackson, we will leave it there. Many thanks for joining us.
See you in Mphuthing.
Take care.
God bless.